Good morning or good afternoon. My name's Shona Jones. So I am part of the Research Partnerships and Innovation team. So Research Partnerships and Innovation is actually quite a big group, and it's a bit deceiving to sort of say I'm going to tell you how we can help, because mainly I'm going to focus on the group that I am a part of. So Research Partnerships and Innovation covers research, finance and governance. It covers research partnerships and development. It covers research and impact strategy. It covers consultancy, industrial strategy, IP, and also international development. So the group that I'm a part of is intellectual property commercialization. So what I'm really going to do is tell you how our group can help you if you think you've got IP in the work that you've done or in the work that you're going to be developing. So the IP team is actually quite a small team. So it's headed up by Emma Nolan, who's the head of IP. We have commercialization managers for the Faculty of Science and Engineering, which is Dr. Andrew Spencer, and for the Faculty of Health and Life Sciences, which is myself. We've got an office administrator, Debbie Yates. We have an IP administrator, Donna, who keeps track of all of our patents and our deadlines. And we've got an IP manager who looks after all the patent management, who's Laura David, and a lot of our legal agreements. We also have a couple of vacant positions at the moment, unfortunately, which are likely to stay vacant for a little while. So that's the EPSRC IAA manager, and also an IP associate who usually helps us with a lot of our legal stuff. So because we're such a small team, we're quite mobile, and we utilize sort of external services of highly specialized consultants. And this works really well because a lot of the projects that come in can vary quite significantly, even within faculty. So my experience wouldn't always cover everything that comes through the door. So we tend to use experts where we can. So we deal with all types of IP. So just in general, to give you sort of, for those of you who don't know much about IP, you can either have registered IP or unregistered IP. And we deal with all types of IP. So predominantly a lot of the IP we deal with tends to be patents for things like sort of new therapeutics, for new medical devices, for new diagnostics. However, we do deal with unpatentable IP such as copyright. We've commercialized various types of sort of copyright IP, for example, in the guise of questionnaires or computer software. So if you think you have any kind of IP at all, don't be afraid to come and chat to us. So just very briefly, when should you engage with the IP and commercialization team? Well, first and foremost, if you think you've got an invention, you should come and have a chat to us. If you're looking for any kind of training on IP or commercialization, please come and talk to us. We can give you general IP advice on what you should and shouldn't do, and advice on whether we think you've got IP or not. We can help with any of the large sort of translational grant applications that have big commercial sections within them. Examples of these types of grants are sort of MRC DPFS grants, NIHR grants, so the likes of I4I grants, and again, the big translational grants from big funders like Cancer Research UK or the British Heart Foundation, etc. We also help out sometimes with research and collaboration agreements where IP rights are negotiated, especially if they're contentious in relation to sort of who owns what with various partners. So the legal team are the ones who would draft and generally sign off these collaboration agreements, but they would come and seek help from us if there's particular issues around IP rights. Also, if you've been approached by a company that's interested in stuff that you're in your research and in stuff that you're developing. And also we can give advice on material transfer agreements which contain IP clauses. So what happens when you come and engage with us? So this is sort of more or less sort of the process that follows if you come and you've basically declared an invention to us. What happens is we initially do some legal due diligence. So what this means is we look into who owns the IP, who the inventors are, where the funding has come from, etc. Has it all been developed at Liverpool? Is there, any commercial involvement? Are there any third-party rights? We also do an initial evaluation. So this might mean looking at the science to see if the science is sound. It might mean looking at the market to see if there's a market potential of what you've developed. We will make a decision and we may do an initial patent filing. So this means sort of if we decide to progress, we'll engage with patent agents and with you to basically help draft a patent and to file it. We look after the patent and all of the IP management. So this basically means we keep a record of the IP, we engage with the patent agents, we look after all of the fees in relation to the filings, the search reports, etc. We deal with all the office actions as they come in with the patent agents and with the inventors, and basically ensure that the patent is maintained appropriately. We can help you to basically secure additional funding. We can direct you towards internal pots of funding which may be appropriate to develop your IP. We can help you secure funding from some of the larger translational funds, and we can help with those applications. And we basically help with the opportunity development. So we will work with you to basically sort of put a pathway in place to develop your IP towards market. So we work with you to identify potential commercial rowers and consultants that we can work with to look at the market and to identify sort of industrial partners we can work with. We'll go out and we'll arrange meetings with those industrial partners and yourself. And then we lead on license deals with industrial partners and negotiate those license deals and look after the license post-sign. And we also spin companies out of the university. So we will help with basically generating funding to support the spin out of a company. We'll help with identifying CEOs and the management team for the company. And all the while this is going on, the IP team do several other things. We develop tools and templates. We develop training for researchers. We look after internal funds such as the Enterprise Investment Fund, which is a fund of roughly 800,000 a year. And we use this fund to help develop certain opportunities. We invest this in spin-out companies from the university, and we're continually building networks with companies, with consultants that we can sort of engage with. So one of the ways we develop training for researchers is that we've applied for funding with Dr. Peter Foster to fund him as an entrepreneur in residence, and Peter's going to be talking in a few minutes about his experiences and also about his entrepreneur in residence role here at Liverpool. So just some things to consider in relation to sort of IP. If you think that there might be some IP in your work that you're doing, learn to recognize IP. Everyone can be an inventor, and please engage with us at the IP team as soon as possible if you think you might have invented something, or if you think something's going to come out of a project that you're working on currently. And please remember to keep everything a secret until you've it's either been evaluated and there's been a patent file, or make sure that you only discuss it under NDA or CDA. So please don't sign agreements without either consulting Liverpool IP or the legal team. And please don't publish, present, or disseminate your innovation until you've spoken to us. And please don't think that IP protection means that you can't publish. You definitely can. We just need to ensure that there's protection in place first. So just to finish off, I'll share these slides with Rachel so she can share them around. But I've just put a couple of links to the intranet pages where we have the some information on sort of IP, the University of Liverpool IP policy, links to the Enterprise Investment Fund, and some email addresses in case you wish to contact us. So I want to introduce Dr. Peter Foster, who's currently our entrepreneur in residence at Liverpool. So Peter, I'm going to hand over to you now and mute myself. So if you would like to share your screen.
Will do so. Hope you can hear me. Okay. Just get to the beginning of the presentation. Right, just to introduce myself then, Peter Foster, I'm a reproductive endocrinologist in background, did a few years postdoctoral research after my PhD, and then spent about 35 years in biotech industry, mainly in medical diagnostics. So that's my background. I'm still involved in advising on commercialization mainly to Liverpool, but to other companies. I'm on the board of 2 medical diagnostics companies, and I'm involved in setting up a spin-out from the University of Liverpool in the diagnostics area. So I'm still active in diagnostics, but also for 1 day a week, I'm now funded to be entrepreneur in residence. Although in fact, in this lockdown period, I'm spending longer than that doing this. What I'm doing is preparing a roadmap for commercialization in life sciences, diagnostics, pharmaceuticals, medical devices, and digital health. Each of those have overlapping areas, but they're somewhat different. That will be on the, eventually will be on the intranet of the university, but we will be disseminating it through workshops and other training, ways of training, and we'll send details of that as they become available. But I'm also keen to hear input from people within the life sciences community of what they would like to see from this training. I'm also available to advise on individual projects as required, as the IP commercialization team asked me to do. But today I'm going to talk about some experiences I've had. As all those years in medical diagnostics, I've always been involved in taking ideas from universities or elsewhere, but mainly universities, and turning them into products, sometimes very successfully, occasionally not successfully. So I want to share some of that with you of what's worked and what hasn't worked, and some perspective from an industry point of view. What we're talking about is research translation, that is turning research into products and companies, and that's for the benefit of society, hopefully, and the economy. There are two ways mainly of doing that, which is licensing out your technology or creating a spin-out. Either way, you need to have a good partnership between the academic team who've come up with the idea and the company. And so I'll talk about that a little bit. Commercialization is, of course, about making money because you want to give a return to your investors, but also create the money for creating jobs for scientists. And over the years, I'm very pleased to say I've created a lot of jobs for a lot of people, and it's very good for me now to hear how some of those people are doing further on in their careers, and that's a great satisfaction to me. The other main thing of commercialization is actually makes your idea see the light of day. You actually, if your idea is to meet an unmet need to help patients, then this is the only way you will actually get that out there, to actually meet that unmet need. And that's a great satisfaction, is to see an invention you've had turn into patient benefit. The innovation process and commercialization processes can be split into three parts, really. One is the research within the university, which is the original idea, the novel thing that's come from your own research that you think could meet an unmet need. And so that's the key part that you will be at this moment, probably in the university. Innovation is taking that idea and making it into a product or something similar, process, a service, or whatever. That requires often a different skill, and usually that's the company working with the university in partnership. You're combining your own skills at coming up with new ideas and your depth of knowledge of that field with the more process-orientated skills of the scientists working in industry, where they've learned how to turn that idea into a product that will sell around the world and will do everything it needs to do and meets regulatory approvals that is essential to put something on the market. And of course, the commercialization itself is a job for the company, and usually people with not only business skills, but a knowledge of your area of science to some extent, not as detailed as you would have, but also an area knowing the field in terms of the what's going on within the marketplace with other commercial products out there and so on. So what does the company look for? When I've been looking out for new ideas to bring in and into products, obviously I'm looking for a product that has a significant revenue generating potential, and that will be the case if it solves a real need, be it in diagnostics. That would be answers a diagnostic problem that was not being solved sufficiently already. So it helps you diagnose something more accurately or faster or earlier, whatever. It also has to have potential use internationally. Very few diagnostic companies have been successful that have only used, for example, the UK market. You need to be able to sell it worldwide, or at least in many countries. Of course, I'm looking for something that has a strategic fit with what my company is working on now, so in the same field or whatever. You're also looking, is the science novel? Is the idea, it may be building on previous ideas, but is that idea novel? Because then you can protect the intellectual property of that idea, and it means when you invest money in it, you're not just going to be copied, you're actually going to be able to make your product gain a sufficient market for it to have been worthwhile. So of course, you need to be able to judge that idea when you see it. So you're looking for a good package of data, and that will be very important to see what data is available to show that the idea that you have is actually working and will solve the problem that it's looking for. And we need to see, I also look whether I can work with that academic team, and are they willing to help me to get to market, and of course I want to work with them as well. So it's very important, I think, to have a good relationship between the academic partner and the company who are working together over a period of months or years even to get these ideas see the light of day. I've worked mainly with universities. It's been very good, and I've enjoyed working with those teams. Occasionally you meet individuals who you don't get on so well with, they're not so willing to work with you, and that is not a good situation to be in. We've heard about the different types of intellectual property from Shona already, but just to emphasize again, it's not just necessarily patents, but the know-how that you have. So even if there's no patent possibility, sometimes there's something in there that nobody else knows that would help you get a lead on the competition. And it might even be a reagent like an antibody or something that nobody else has. When you're choosing the right partner, what should you look for? I think, and that's something that I'm putting into the roadmap as well, actually, is how you identify the right partner. And so you'll be able to get some more information on that. Obviously, people in your own, in the field in which your idea is, and you can Google different companies who are involved in that field, look at their websites, see what their latest developments have been, and are they in your field, are they likely to be interested? And it's not always the large companies. I found that they're usually very slow at decision making. So although you think, well, I'd like to do it with Roche or somebody else, if of course they were interested, then you might be, but often they're very slow and it takes a long time to get them interested. They would actually prefer for somebody else to develop the idea and for them to buy it off you, off that company, or to collaborate with that company. So it may not be, it may be a medium size or even a small company that is the preferable company to work with. But you must be confident that they have the capability of developing your product. Have they enough critical mass in their team to take your idea to market? And they must have good knowledge of good quality systems and the regulatory needs of the different markets. So that's very important. So although they don't have to be large, they do have to have capability. And also see if you, when you get into meeting the teams, do you have a rapport with them, and gauge whether they understand your project really. You will get that information over time as you have conversations with them and they with you. But also, I think it's important you make sure you get professionals to help you when you come to actually making a deal with a company, a contract or so on, because that's not knowledge you will have, or even I would have. I always use professional people to help you negotiate contracts, because they will be the ones that make sure you have got all your risks covered and you get the best deal out of it. But I should also say that a good deal is where both you and the company win. You know, it's got to work for both parties or it won't work. So you have to make sure that both sides will get something good out of the deal. So what do you need to provide them? Well, obviously, in the first place, they need a very short briefing on the idea. If you're sending out to new contacts who you've never met before, they're only going to want to see something very quick and short, so maybe a one-page or two-page idea, but it should sum up all the good qualities of this idea so that it attracts their interest. So what is the idea? What unmet need does it meet? What data have you got to show that it works? And is it protected by patents, or could it be protected by patents, and that sort of thing. So you start off with giving them non-confidential information, then you sign a confidentiality agreement, and then probably you provide them with a dossier of more detailed information, making sure even at that stage you don't give away too many trade secrets. You have to give them enough to get them interested, but until you build confidence, just make sure you hold some things back. Of course, they need to know what the main claims of your patents are, if there are patents, that sort of thing. They have to, in the future, if we do work together, they'll need to build a product to regulatory standards. So they will need to have good information from your research to back that idea up as well. So just be careful to make sure that any information you've used to develop that idea is easily available to pass on to the company for that purpose. What makes relationships work? Well, I think they must work to mutual benefit. I've said this before, and that's very clear. In all the arrangements I've had where that have been successful, there was mutual benefit. It must be a clear role for both parties in this. What is the academic group doing? What is the company doing? So that it's very clear and there's no misunderstandings between everybody. The contract has got to be fair to everybody, of course, but good communication is vital. Both teams must respect each other and understand each other's needs. Try and avoid jargon where you can, because their jargon might not be the same as yours, and so on. Just avoid miscommunication. And a good transfer of information so that the design of the product is with best information you have, and you've got information or the design history file that is something that the company has to build for regulatory purposes. And at the start, I think you've got to have clear design goals. What is it the product should look like to meet this unmet need? What will customers want from this product? And must make sure you design that in the first place. What is the performance in accuracy in diagnosis, if it's a diagnostic? Does it need to be fast? Does it need to be very simple to use? Is it going to be in a laboratory or near the patient in the surgery, or what's it used for, and how should that be incorporated into the design? It's very clear, very important from the beginning that this is clear what is required from the product. And I've just given a few examples of, this is an example of something that's worked. I worked for many years with the Kennedy Institute for Rheumatology, who were the group that produced the TNF-alpha agonist that was used in rheumatoid arthritis and now more widely used for other diseases. I used to work with Professor Maney and meet him regularly on other things, and he asked me one day, he's got this drug that's coming out, it looks very good, but what we need is a diagnostic to diagnose early and accurately people with rheumatoid arthritis. And could I do that for him? I found some research in the University of Nijmegen. They had an unoptimized test which looked very promising, had very high specificity, but its sensitivity was not quite good enough. Anyway, we over time negotiated a contract with them for licensing. They retained ownership of all the patents and the milestone payments and royalties and so on. We improved the test so that its sensitivity was much higher and made it much simpler so that it could be used around the world very easily. We launched our own branded test, and the university, of course, were getting milestone payments through all this. We found opinion leaders around the world who were interested in this. And actually, over a period of 2 to 3 years, I think, we had 400 publications on this product. Such was the interest in it. We then got interest from Roche and Abbott, in fact, and we talked with both, and we agreed to give the license to Roche. So the university and the company I work for, Eurodiagnostica, benefited from that product. But probably very importantly, patients could then be much better targeted for this new, quite expensive TNF-alpha antagonist drug, which was the first drug actually to stop joint damage as well as prevent inflammation. So it actually treated the progress of the disease, didn't cure it, but it slowed progress of the joint damage, and therefore that's why it's been so successful. However, I've worked on ideas that didn't work. For example, we had a company in Scotland who were a spin-out company at the University of Dundee that I worked for, and we had a test. They presented a test for urinary tract infection that measured antibodies in urine. Idea was it would be IgA, would be local antibodies, would indicate local infection. They gave very good data showing 90% sensitivity and specificity or over that. However, when we developed the test in real life and put it into the prototype into some early tests, we found the sensitivity and specificity were much lower. Particularly specificity was down as low as 60%. And the reason was there were also antibodies in urine from blood, from past infections, because in these urinary tract infections, you get hematuria and, of course, passage of antibodies from the blood into the urine. So although it somewhat was related to presence of urinary tract infection, it wasn't good enough and the product failed. So performance has to be good and has to be proven in a good cohort of samples as well. Another idea that worked scientifically was we developed some in another company in New Zealand, companies set up by research from the Institute for Cancer Research in the UK, but also from a New Zealand scientist. We developed cell signaling pathway assays for use in drug discovery. So what the drug candidates were doing to cell signaling pathways in terms of switching them on or turning them off or whatever. They've worked very successfully, but there was no patentable invention there, unfortunately. And a US company called Cell Signaling saw our tests at a trade show, copied them, and consequently the market for the small company was very limited, and Cell Signaling did very well out of the idea. So That is why you need good patent protection. So my final thoughts are, good commercialization, of course, requires good ideas that work, are novel and patentable. A good understanding of the market is required, and therefore you need all that information to get good product design. The end result of success is great satisfaction at helping a real need, as well as the financial things. I spoke with, I call him Tiny Maney, Professor Sir Ravinder Maney, who was behind the development of the TNF-alpha antagonist that I referred to earlier. And although his team made a lot of money out of that drug, he didn't himself personally, but his research did, which was good. But the satisfaction to him was that his patients, because he saw patients as well, he was a clinician, his patients now walked into his surgery instead of coming in wheelchairs, because the drug that he was using was limiting their joint damage. So that was his great satisfaction, and that's a good thing, I think. Of course, you need financial success, because you need to create jobs for scientists, you need return to inventors and to the investors, and you can the money can be funded put back into universities to fund more research and so on. And so I'll finish there and take any questions, or we can talk later.
Thank you very much, Peter. So that's a really interesting look at the whole thing from a different point of view. There is one question which I think is worth asking now. Particularly with med tech, getting into the market isn't necessarily the end of the process, particularly in the UK, is you need it to get adopted.
Yes.
And so it's sort of, how does the university see that's a role in NICE and in sort of the NHS and Department of Health, for example? And have you sort of got examples of how you've managed to get things adopted by NICE?
Yes, but NICE and, well, I say that the rheumatoid one that I just mentioned, which comes to mind quickly, we actually got that as part of the criteria for defining that disease by the American College of Rheumatology. So, and that couldn't have been done without all the publications that came from that. But yeah, in general, yes, a company would continue to work with the university group, because they would hopefully publish on the research and help create opinion leader interest around the world, particularly in this country and elsewhere. But also, it's very important to have the detailed knowledge of the scientists involved in developing the product, who had the original idea, in talking to NICE, and indeed, as we're doing with our company we're spinning out from Liverpool, we're talking to the CCGs as well at a more local level, to see the health economic benefit of the tests we're hoping to do. So the health economic side is very important, but also from the university's point of view, helping in that process of getting the understanding of how this product meets the unmet need for NICE and for the CCGs is crucial.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, thank you very much. Stay around, because I'm sure there'll be more questions at the end. I'll now share my screen, and I'm going to give a short presentation on some of my experience of working with companies from an academic point of view. So if I go here. Is that, can you see that? So as just sort of looking at this down from a more academic point of view, I've been involved in collaborations with industry in a number of different ways, and I've picked here a couple of examples that I want to go through in a little bit of detail. One is with a company called Floron, who's a German company, and they make ophthalmic silicone oils. They're probably an SME, or probably count as an SME, but they also are part of a parent company which is much larger, that's called Goida. Then a second example I'll talk about is an interaction I've had for a long time with a company called Biomer Technology Ltd. They're a micro SME, or if not a nano SME. They're extremely small, but they're based very locally, just in Runcorn, and they make tailored services for controlling cellular responses. And then just at the end, I'm going to go through a couple of other examples where I've worked with some different companies where perhaps things haven't been so long in development, or the outcome hasn't been quite so successful. So we start by talking about Goida, though. Floron. So Floron, this work involves looking at different ways of treating retinal detachment. So if you look at the picture here, this is what you might see where a retina has torn. You can see here the flap is flapped open here. And what can happen then is that the fluid from within the vitreous cavity gets down behind the retina, and your retina becomes detached from the underlying tissues. And this is obviously a sight-threatening condition. The way in which the clinicians go about treating it is relatively simple. You either push something in from the outside and push the sclera back into contact, or the inside here into contact with the retina, or you go inside the eye and you put something in the eye, which then pushes the retina back onto the underlying tissues. So we think about this from a materials point of view. We need to look at the interfacial energies of the material, so how they interacts around this area here. We need to look at the viscosity, so how easy is it to inject or to remove from the eye. And we need to look at specific gravity. Does it float or does it sink if we need to treat retinal detachments in the lower part of the eye? And the sort of materials that are currently used as tamponade agents, as they're called, the simplest ones is just air, or sometimes a sulfur hexafluoride. Or silicone oils. Those are the two major materials that are currently used. So if I think about the timeline of this, is actually work that started back in 1995, when the clinicians in St. Paul's Eye Unit came to me and asked if I could help in terms of understanding how the silicone oils that they were using in the eye were actually working. So we sort of set up a partnership between us in Liverpool, which was myself, some actual colleagues in the Department of Physics, and Research Partnership Innovations, who were called Business Gateway in those days, and St. Paul's Eye Unit. And they already worked with this company called Floron. They purchased the silicone oils they used from these people. So we started by looking at the way in which these materials actually behaved. So for example, if you put air, it was very difficult for the surgeons to see how they worked within the eye. So we built a simple model to show them, basically to look at the interfacial energies and how the materials interacted. If you've got an air bubble inside an eye, you can see that it produces a particular shape. Whereas if you put a silicone oil bubble inside the eye, it makes a different shape. And this is to do with the differences in specific gravity of the materials and the interfacial energetics. And interestingly, they used to put explants on the outer of the eye to try and push the tear into the bubble. But what you could clearly see when we demonstrated this on the model, that actually what that does is it pushes the bubble away. So they needed to put their explants on the other side of the eye to push the bubble to create a tamponading effect, if you like, on this side of the eye. And similarly, they used to put encircling bands around it. And you can see again how this actually has a detrimental effect in terms of tamponading close to where the band is, but a much better effect up here in terms of where it's contacting the eye. And at this stage, we were able to publish a lot about this work, so we will continue to publish this and help clinicians in many ways to use these products more effectively. Then we moved on, so Floron decided to develop what they called a heavy tamponade, and they did this by adding semi-fluorinated alkanes to the silicone oil. It's just black here, so we could see it when we photographed it more effectively. When you add the two together, there's actually a problem in terms of solubility, or difficulty in terms of solubility, and you can only get a certain amount of this semi-fluorinated alkane into the silicone oil. By adding different amounts, you can see how the specific gravity has gone up. but not very much. So it's only just above 1 rather than silicon oil, which is just below 1. So although now the silicon oil droplet, or this heavy tamponade is heavy, so it's tamponading the lower part of the eye, it's still a very spherical bubble. As you get it slightly heavier, you can see that the bubble begins to flatten, and therefore there's more contact at the bottom here. And what we worked with them was to try and find a way which they could work out how much of the semifluorinated alkane they needed to add to then make a product that was going to be most effective. And this is the material they came up with, and they sold this as a material called Denseron. Again, we continued. There were no problem working with this company. They were very happy for us to publish, and in fact, they funded us to go to some conferences and present the work so that more people would use their materials. And it was a very understanding and good collaboration that we were having. We then moved on, and a bit later we decided that we wanted to try and address this problem with emulsification resistance. So all these silicon oils, when you put them into the eye, they emulsify. This person's had a heavy tamponade put in, and these are emulsified droplets that's come through the pupil into the anterior chamber of the eye. And clearly this is detrimental to the vision of this patient. So this actually was when we particularly started working with the people in physics who had quite a lot of knowledge about rheology. And there is this hypothesis that if you could increase the extensional viscosity of a material, you can increase its emulsification resistance. And this is a technology that's used in other industries, for example, aircraft fuel, where if you don't do this in aircraft fuel, it becomes very explosive because the droplets of the emulsion are too small. If you add a very high molecular weight polymer to your aircraft fuel, you can reduce the amount of emulsification, or the size of the droplets, increase the size of the droplets, and then reduce the explosiveness. So we thought, well, maybe we could apply this to the silicon oil. And the way this works is if you add a very small amount of a high molecular weight silicon polymer, so exactly the same chemistry, but it's a different molecular weight, you get these really large molecules within there, which when at low strain rates, they're all higgledy-piggledy, and therefore the viscosity is high. But as you strain this, you line up your large molecules, and therefore the shear goes down. So in other words, it becomes easier to inject, but the extensional viscosity is increased because this becomes much more difficult for this to break up, because it becomes stringy, if you like, and therefore you can stretch it out and you don't get the emulsified droplets forming so much. So we actually managed to get some EPSRC funding to examine this hypothesis. And you can see here, it's probably a little bit small, but where we added our high molecular weight polymer, these two, this is this one and this one, you can see that the extensional viscosity began to go up as we strained the material higher. And yet the shear viscosity of all of these were actually reducing with strain rate. So this proved that this hypothesis could actually work to some extent. So Liverpool patented this as a new tamponade agent, and Floron were very interested, and we licensed it, or the university licensed it to Floron at this stage. And in fact, Floron took on paying the patent costs at this stage as well, and also began to make a small contribution in terms of royalty payments to the university. We did a little bit of work to look at the injection or injectability of this material, and in fact, it was much easier to inject. And when they talked to the clinicians, interestingly, the clinicians were more interested by the fact that it was more easily to inject and in terms of its emulsification resistance. But you know, again, we carried on publishing on this, having patented it, and Floron gave us a small amount of money to try and develop this then as a product that they could then take forward. This work continued, working with Floron very, very successfully, and in fact they began to manufacture this material. They gave it a name, Celeron 2000, and they got it CE marked, which was relatively easy because we hadn't changed the chemistry. All we had done is change the molecular weight of the material that we'd added to it. And they launched this product. And they started then to sell it to people to try in trials and get some responses from the community on how well it would work. And now they started to provide the university with some royalty costs associated with the number of products they sold. And in fact, they carried on then, and as time went on, they launched 2 more products based on this same technology, Silicon Extra, which is the same as this one, it just has a higher percentage of molecular weight material. And then they took their heavy silicone oil, Denseron, and they added the same technology to that. And that's more recently been launched. Now, around this sort of time here, unfortunately, the relationship with Fluoron soured for a little while, which was a surprise to me and perhaps in my naivety. And I think what actually happened was that the people we'd been working with at Fluoron for a long time and had developed a really good relationship with left Fluoron, one of the people in particular, and Goida, the parent company, took on some of the negotiations with the university. And in fact, what seemed to have actually happened was they were paying the university less than, they were looking at the best deal for the company, clearly, and were perhaps paying the university less than we thought, or the university thought they should be paid for the royalty. This led to some very embarrassing, from my point of view, meetings which we had to have with them to try and work out why they were behaving like this. And I can say it wasn't really up to me, it was Business Gateway, as it was then, who led these discussions. And I'm glad to say that actually they solved the problem, and they started coming back and paying the university the royalty costs that the university expected. But they came up with a better deal for both partners, I think, in the long run. And the nice thing about that is, because that was then solved, we have then ended up continuing our collaboration with them, which has been very successful. So I really didn't want to stop that collaboration. So where are we now with this? These materials, these products are being sold worldwide, which is, you know, I really get a nice feeling from that, the fact some things that we did, some basic science at the very beginning, has been taken on and is actually being used to treat patients. And more recently, we've been beginning to discuss some other projects with them. So my colleague, Victoria Kearns, who many of you will know, is working with the company as well with her work in terms of drug delivery oils. And we have come up with another area of interest to them, where we've come up with another treatment for a different eye disease called keratoconus. And they're very interested in possibly partnering with us on that project as well. We haven't got as far as taking that the next step yet. We have a patent that's been filed by the university and is going forward, and actually has been awarded in the States, which is a few months ago, which is very nice. And we're hoping to go for an MRC DPFS to take this project forward, and maybe for Fluoron or Goida in this instance will be our partner in that. So, you know, it's moving on from one product area where we have got a good relationship with them and potentially going into others, which is a nice way to take it. So more briefly now, let me go on and talk about our interaction with Biomer Technologies. I say they're a very small company and they're based in Runcorn. The technology that we're working on here is actually their technology rather than ours. And they have a very interesting technology where they can develop acrylic polymers, which they can put very specific functional groups on them, these functional groups here. And these functional groups can have different characters. They can have amine functionalities, hydroxyl functionalities, or carboxyl functionalities, for example. And by doing some clever chemistry, that is their proprietary technology, they can build polymer surfaces that can mimic peptides. And specifically, they've done some that mimic RGD sequences, for example, so cell adhesive protein type peptide surfaces. And they feel that these are materials that they could then use as a way of controlling cellular responses in terms of medical applications. They haven't been able to patent this technology because the inventive step is considered too obvious. So the only way that they can maintain their business is to keep this completely secret. And this does have a bearing on our collaboration with them. However, we have worked with them for many years. They initially came to us and asked us, because they're basically a chemistry company, could we do some biocompatibility testing for them? They got some money from a SMART award and paid us to do that. This then led on to a KTP program. Now, some of you may know about KTP programs, but let me introduce them to you because I think they're a really useful way of academics and companies working together. KTP stands for a Knowledge Transfer Partnership, and it's funded usually by Innovate UK, but as some of the other research councils also get involved with it. And what it's designed to do is to help a business interact with a company, with an academic, where the academic has a skill that the company wants to obtain and wants to possibly either to use or to bring into their company to develop a product and to increase therefore their competitiveness and productivity. What it does for the company is it allows them to access this knowledge and skills in a university, and this grant is part paid for. They do have to contribute a bit to it, but they get a significant amount of money from the government. From an academic's point of view, it's a really nice way of working with a company that's funded, and it buys out half a day a week of your time. So what happens with that is that money that's half a day a week of your time comes back to you as flexible funds, which means you can use it in many different ways to support your work, either with these people or with other funds. And I must admit, I've used quite a lot of the funds I've got from these for taking PhD students to conferences or various other things in a very nice flexible way. It funds us what's known as a KTP associate. So this is somebody who is employed by the university but works for the company. So it's very nice for the associate in terms of getting experience of working in a company and with academia. And also the other nice thing about it is these KTP programs have a really big training budget, which can't be used for anything other than training for the associate. So they can choose to use that to go to conferences, to go to trade fairs, or to do regulatory training, for example, which a lot of my KTP associates have done. So we, sorry, move on the slide. So that we ran a KTP program. It was a 2-year program, and the associate actually did most of the work in the university because there weren't any facilities for biocompatibility testing out at the company. But it still was a very successful program, and the company got what it wanted out of it. At the same time as that, we actually got 2 case awards, 2 case studentships to work with the company. One, obviously more in my area, where we looked to see whether their polymers were going to be useful in terms of some medical devices associated with vision. And another one, which was much more in their area, which was using they were particularly interested in using their polymer coating for inhibiting in-stent restenosis in coronary artery stents. Case awards, again, I'm sure most of you know about case awards, but they're really nice PhD studentships. They are funded usually by research councils, which cover the fees and the stipend and some bench fees. For the student, the company usually gives them some extra stipend, which is very nice for them, and they get placements within the company. And very often, and particularly with Biomer Technology, it was very useful for us, and they provided a lot of materials and some extra bench fees. For the company, case awards are good because they're really not very expensive to them. It probably costs them about £4,000 a year. And it gives them an opportunity to work with a university department for a relatively long period of time, so 3.5 years, which gives you a really good idea to work out whether you have a good partnership, whether you're going to work together, and you can see how each other works. And I actually find that from an academic point of view is also a really good way of deciding whether this is a company that you think you can work with. Things I think to remember about case studentships is that they really are training positions for students, and therefore the company has to be prepared that the research may not lead to immediate results for them, and sometimes that can be a frustration. These studentships were really good, and they lent to a further collaboration with a company. This was actually work led by Trish Murray. So I was working with Trish Murray on other projects, and my interaction with Biomer Technology allowed her then to interact with them and got involved with some of her EU projects she was doing. And in fact, we ended up with 2 studentships for this, one from the Nephrotools project and one for another BBSLC case studentship. And again, these produced really, really good output in terms of PhD theses. And then most recently, I've carried on working with Biomer Technology through my BPSRC fellowship, where they've been a very important partner on that, providing materials, and we've been looking at using their materials as an in vitro surface for expanding stem cells for the conjunctiva in particular. But I think one of the important things to remember about this output, this was quite difficult to publish this work because the material that this company has is a secret. It's very difficult then to publish a paper on results for a secret material. And so this hasn't led to a lot of publications. However, it has led to 4 PhD studentships or 4 PhD theses. And so I think it's important to think of that publications is not necessarily one of the big outputs you're going to get from these sort of interactions. So just very briefly, I know coming to the end of time here, a couple of other projects that I've had with other companies have been polyphotonics. I've had 2 KTPs and a case studentship with them. Those have led to outputs for the company in terms of this Noctura sleep mask, which is a prophylactic mask for diabetics who are at risk of getting diabetic retinopathy. The second KTP led to an instrument for diagnosing retinal diseases, or a prototype instrument. Unfortunately, that's not been taken any further. Sadly, this company has had serious economic problems and it's really reduced in size, so we haven't really been able to take that forward much more recently. Although we did, in our last round of the BBSR DTP, get awarded a studentship and appoint someone who then sadly turned us down. So there are ways in which we're still trying to work with them. And I've had other case awards with other companies, large ones and small ones, which actually haven't led to any further collaboration, that the studentships perhaps demonstrated that these weren't perhaps something that was going to be particularly useful to us to take forward. So really what's worked for me, and I think this rather nicely actually echoes many of the things that Peter said, that the collaborations have to be built on true partnerships, otherwise they really don't work. And there needs to be complete openness on all sides so that everyone knows what everyone's role is. And very clearly there has to be benefit on both sides. I think there is a misunderstanding sometimes from academics that businesses have lots of money and should pay for everything they do in academia. And I think there's also a misunderstanding on company side where they think the universities have lots of kits that's sitting around not doing very much, and lots of PhD students that easily do a bit of work for them for free. And I think that's not true either, and it's not, you know, I think there needs to be really good understanding about that. And I think the other thing is we need to make sure that you don't just look for outputs in terms of publications when you're working for companies. There are other things that can be output that you need to sort of think about and realise. A patent definitely helps, and certainly when we've held the patent, it's been easier for us to work with companies, but it's not the only thing, and it's not the only thing of value when you're working with a company. And just my final point is to work with people in RP&I right from the very start, because they can be incredibly helpful to you. And if you don't, and you know, that they have things to offer that are skill sets that we as academics don't have. And I think it's really productive to have discussions from them right from the very beginning. And that's really me. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I'm very happy to answer questions. And I think Peter and Shona also will be very happy to answer questions if there are any. I know we've got to our 2 o'clock, so I'm sure lots of people have to leave now, but are there any questions? Oh, there are some questions. I'm sorry, I see some here. So questions about commercial secrecy and PhD theses. So you can always put your PhD theses into storage such that they cannot be made publicly available, and you can put a time limit on that. You need to talk to your company about that because if they want to patent something from it, they have to get on and patent it in a reasonable length of time. We can't make PhD theses secret forever. And there's there has to be an agreement, and maybe Peter can actually comment on this in terms of the way in which companies can get on and patent if they want to. Peter, do you want to add something there?
Well, I just say, well, as you've said, working together is very important, and I think that, particularly on publications, that's very relevant, because we as companies have to be aware that publications are very important for disseminating science and for the individual's careers. So I think it's very important that these companies get on and patent something if that's what's required, so that the publication can go ahead. It's more difficult, I know, where there's no patent possible, as the case you mentioned, and that's a very difficult one to deal with.
I think as well, it's usually dealt with in the original collaboration agreement. So, Rachel, you would have put collaboration agreements in place with all of the companies you've dealt with, covering the work you're doing, and usually the issue of publication is covered in those collaboration agreements. We usually agree between the two parties what a reasonable amount of time is for you to sort of let the company know that you have an idea or that you want to publish. The company will then have sort of maybe 2 months to basically sort of take action if they want to file a patent, and after that point generally then you're free to sort of publish at will, basically. So usually that type of publication issue is covered off in collaboration agreements anyway, so it's always important to sort of pay attention to sort of how much of a time frame is put in there. Companies will obviously always want as much time as possible to sort of review things, and we try and keep that to sort of a reasonable level so that we're not sort of impacting too much on people's publications.
Another question is about PowerPoint slides. Pedro, everything is put on the extranet, or the intranet, sorry, afterwards. So it'll be uploaded by Louise very shortly. And Paul asked about the original contract with Biomer. Biomer originally came to me because they wanted some biocompatibility testing done. And so they clearly were looking for people within the university who had expertise on medical devices and biocompatibility testing. And actually at that stage, that was one of the particular contracts we had, in fact, with what was the DTI in those days, was how to set up standard biocompatibility testing. So it came through that and then has developed ever since. And one thing I just wanted to say about Biomer, actually, one of the really nice things about working with a small company locally is that when you want more materials, they tend to turn up on your doorstep 2 days later with the materials. When I worked with someone like GSK and I wanted materials, they weren't allowed to give them to me until they'd been through their lawyers and their finance departments and everything. And as Peter said, they can be very, very slow. And even when the scientists in the larger companies are really interested in working with you, they're often constrained by other parts of the company. Whereas when you work with a small company, they actually have the ability to respond to you very, very much more quickly and more effectively. And in fact, the other thing about Biomer is I've lost count of how many MRes projects they've supported by their materials. So it may not be that you know, the outputs from some of these things are much bigger than you might realize.
Just as well to mention, if anyone is interested in KTP, the person to contact in RPI is Inma Gonzalez. So she heads that up at the moment. So if there's any interest from you or from a partner in sort of looking at a KTP, Inma is the person to speak to.
So another question, finding true relationships is very important. Yes, so this is Masood. He's still waiting for medical devices to come from a company, and I can imagine that that can be very frustrating. Are they a big company? Masood, do you want to ask your question specifically? Okay, not a question, just sharing experiences. Any other questions, anybody? Well, thank you very much, and thank you, Peter, very much, and Shona for coming along and sharing that. I think my message to everyone is please do contact Shona and Peter if you have any ideas that you want to follow up in more detail. And I think some of you may feel that you don't have something that's close enough to a product. I actually wouldn't worry about that at this stage. I think that very often some very early ideas are the sort of things that Shona and Peter actually want to hear about. Is that not true?
Absolutely. The earlier you come and speak to us, the better. Although we mightn't be in a position to file a patent right now, we can certainly give you advice on exactly what data you might need to generate. We can help you identify companies to engage with. We can point you in the direction of pump prime funding to actually fund the work you might need to do. And also we can do things like sort of look at the market. We can engage with external expertise as well. So there's lots of things we can do to basically help you push the project towards a commercial outcome.
Great. Thank you very much, everybody, and see you next week at the seminar.
Thank you.
Thank you.